All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Mass Robotics Healthcare Robotics Working Group. My name is Juan Negochea. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at Mass Robotics. Thank you for joining us in this very important conversation. Mass Robotics is the largest independent robotics innovation hub. Our mission is to advance robotics, automation, and AI by supporting startups, connecting industry leaders, and driving technology adoption. One way we do this is through sector-specific working groups that bring together technologists, business leaders, and innovators to collaborate and share challenges. The Healthcare Robotics Working Group is a very active community, and today's session is a result from that collective effort. This webinar is also part of our Healthcare Robotics Startup Catalyst program, which supports early-stage robotics companies working in the intersection of robotics and healthcare. The program is made possible thanks to the active and participatory support of our sponsors and steering committee members. They are Festo, Novanta, MITRE, and Mitsubishi Electric. We'll be announcing the application process for the cohort 5 later this year. In the meantime, if you or someone you know is developing a robotic solution in healthcare, please feel free to reach out and we can share an early application form for next year's cohort. As robotic systems become more integrated into clinical workflows, addressing cybersecurity is no longer optional. It is essential to both safety and regulatory approval. So this session will focus on how cybersecurity, particularly through threat modeling, can be built into the design of medical devices, including those that involve human-robot interaction. Our speakers will share how tools like SBOMs and FDA guidance can be used to shape real-world healthcare robotic systems. We're very fortunate to be joined here by two outstanding experts from MITRE, Penny Chase, standing leader in cybersecurity for healthcare systems, participating in the FDA's HPH Sector Coordinating Council Cybersecurity Working Group, and an active member of our Healthcare Robotics Working Group Steering Committee. And also Dr. Matt Weir, a cybersecurity researcher at MITRE with deep expertise in threat modeling, medical device security, and adversarial thinking. They will help us understand how startups can approach cybersecurity early in the design process to avoid costly delays, build resilient systems, and meet regulatory expectations. I'll be moderating today's session, so feel free to type your questions into the chat at any point during the presentation. With that, I'm excited to turn things over to Penny and Matt. Thank you both for being here.
Okay, so some of you might not know what MITRE is, or who MITRE is, so just briefly, MITRE is a not-for-profit that operates 6 federally funded research and development centers, or FFRDCs. And these FFRDCs support different government agencies, including the DoD and intelligence community, the Department of Health and the Department of Health and Human Services, including FDA, the Department of Homeland Security, including CISA, which is responsible for cybersecurity in the homeland, and the NIST, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, among others. MITRE is a systems engineering company, and we apply systems thinking across domains and technologies to solve complex national and global problems to improve safety, stability, and the well-being of our nation. So next slide. So the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Devices and Radiologic Health oversees the regulation of medical devices, including robotics medical devices. And for a little over 10 years, cybersecurity has been a main area of concern and interest for CDRH. And on their 10th anniversary last year, they put together this nice little infographic on the right that shows what their accomplishments have been over the past 10 years. They've been actively involved in identifying cybersecurity vulnerabilities. They have issued safety alerts and even recalls for cybersecurity issues found in devices. And most importantly, they've developed different kinds of resources to help the medical device ecosystem device manufacturers, but also healthcare delivery organizations, clinical practitioners, and patients to help them all understand cybersecurity in the devices that they use. In particular, CDRH publishes guidance, both pre-market guidance to help medical device manufacturers understand how to build secure devices and what kinds of information they need to provide to FDA to assure FDA that they've satisfied the cybersecurity and quality system regulations, and also post-market guidance, which focuses on how you manage the cybersecurity risk, especially managing vulnerabilities for newly discovered vulnerabilities once a device is on the market. A word about guidance. If you read CDRH's guidance, you'll see that it says that these are non-binding recommendations. These are not mandatory, they're not binding, they're voluntary, but they represent FDA's current thinking of what the regulations are. It's easier to issue guidance than issue new regulations, so they can update the guidance to reflect the changing threat landscape, for example. But, as I said, it's voluntary, but if you don't follow the recommendations in the guidance, it's going to be on you to explain to FDA how you are satisfying the regulations. So most manufacturers actually find it's easier to follow the guidance than not follow the guidance. So one interesting thing happened a couple of years ago in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was amended to include cybersecurity. Until now, all of the work CDRH did with cybersecurity fell under the quality system regulations, but it was felt that there needed to be some more specific regulation or legislative authority for cybersecurity. So the amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act basically says that FDA can require in submissions cybersecurity related things pertaining to cyber devices, which are really just medical devices that are connected to the internet. And this includes submitting a plan for how you're going to establish a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program, plans and processes to provide a reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure, processes for post-market updates and patches, and requiring the submission of a software bill of materials or SBOM. Next slide. And so this is the pre-market guidance, which is probably most relevant to what we're going to talk about today. It's very comprehensive. Basically, they're establishing a secure product development framework that can be used to satisfy the quality system regulation. And in the guidance, the FDA talks about what this framework is, how you design for security, how you carry out security risk management through risk assessments, addressing concerns in third-party software components, managing security risks throughout the total product lifecycle, architecting the security, including implementing security controls in a device, carrying out different kinds of cybersecurity testing, and cybersecurity transparency through SBOMs. So this is really your starting point if you want to understand what you need to do to build a secure medical device. So today we're going to focus on threat modeling and cybersecurity transparency, i.e. SBOMs. And I'm going to start off by talking about SBOMs a little bit and then turn the show over to Matt to talk about threat modeling. So next slide. So as I said earlier, SBOMs actually appear in the amended Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So Congress is giving HHS and FDA the right to require SBOMs as part of submissions. And in the pre-market guidance, FDA spells out what their expectations are for these SBOMs. So why are we so interested in SBOMs? So SBOMs are a key part of vulnerability management. It's not everything, but it's your starting point. You have to know what you have if you want to secure it and manage the vulnerabilities in it. And so it's critical for the overall security risk management processes that a manufacturer is going to have in place and hospitals will have in place. This is, FDA's, the way they approach cybersecurity is really through risk management. SBOMs also provide transparency to the components, both commercial and open source, to the end users of the device. And those end users may be healthcare delivery organizations, clinicians, even patients. So you know what you got. It's kind of like labeling of drugs. You know what the ingredients are. And finally, SBOM documentation helps device manufacturers demonstrate that they comply with laws and regulations, including the quality system regulations in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Okay, next slide. So what does FDA ask for about SBOMs in the pre-market guidance? First, they recommend that you provide at the least the baseline attributes defined in the NTIA framework for software transparency document. So there really are not that many. It's, the author name, who produced the SBOM, the timestamp of when it was produced, who supplies the component, what is the component, what's the version of the component, a unique identifier like a CPE, a common platform enumeration, or a PURL, a package URL, and relationships about that a component is contained in a component, for example. And you might provide a component hash, but that's an optional element. In addition to the baseline attributes, FDA also recommends in the guidance 2 additional elements in the SBOM. The level of support that's provided through monitoring and maintenance from the manufacturer. For example, is it actively maintained, no longer maintained, is it abandonware? The second, the software components end of support date. There's a little note down there that says in a draft of the guidance, FDA asked for vulnerability information about the component to be included in the SBOM, and after there was pushback in during the comment period, FDA still wants to see the vulnerability information, but it no longer recommends that it has to be a part of the SBOM. But they recognize that the vulnerability information and the SBOM itself are kind of separable, so you don't want to require that that the vulnerability information gets shoved into the SBOM. And FDA wants complete information during the pre-market submission. So next slide. So one of the things that MITRE has done for FDA over the years is develop supplementary material to help medical device stakeholders deal with or understand how they can go and implement the recommendations in the pre-market and post-market guidance. And so FDA recognizes that it is complex to create SBOMs, and they felt that manufacturers might have some challenges in doing so. And so in particular, they were concerned about data normalization challenges, and they asked MITRE to write a white paper describing these challenges and providing some mitigations to those challenges. So, you know, as you saw on the previous slide, there are a bunch of baseline attributes. Most of them are strings. And there's very little in both the framing document or in the SBOM formats that tell you what the content of those attributes have to be. So you can see there might be differences in punctuation. You might see different abbreviations or things fully spelled out. Differences in case, is it lowercase, uppercase, camel case? Words might be separated by spaces, dashes, underscores. You might see different types of date-time formats, different ways of specifying versions. You don't have consistent nomenclature. You know, is it Windows 2000, Windows 2K, Win2K? And software identifiers are a challenge. They might not exist. CPEs are only produced when a vulnerability is found. So how do you provide a software identifier? It can be challenging. And the reason why we have all these normalization challenges is there are multiple tools that a manufacturer may use to create their SBOMs because they've got different build processes using different tooling. They may be getting SBOMs from upstream suppliers, and they may all use different tools. There tends not to be a single source of truth. For example, for software identifiers, you know, if you don't have a vulnerability discovered that led to a CPE being produced, there may not be a ground truth for software identifiers, and different people will go and roll their own. And I alluded to the multiple SBOM formats, which can create normalization challenges. And medical device development is very complex. You know, even for one product, you might end up having multiple SBOMs because you have a piece of that product is an app on a smartphone, a piece of it is some embedded software in the physical device itself, there may be a cloud component, and all of those may lead to independent SBOMs that are created through different kinds of build processes, and they might not be at all consistent with each other. So recognizing that there are these challenges, we made some recommendations on how to mitigate them. Tooling is very important, but the tools are not perfect, so you need to be prepared that you may have to do manual intervention to resolve false positives and false negatives, mismatches, and so on. This is a new, rapidly evolving area, and manufacturers really need to prepare for the evolution of tooling and standards. We've heard of manufacturers who, one year they were using one SBOM tool, and the next year this new tool came out that was so much better, so they actually just went and threw everything out and adopted the new tool. So you need to be flexible and nimble. One way that can help in that is maintaining your own aliasing matching capability that represents your ground truth. And that may be an internal database, or your SBOM tool vendor might provide that capability for you. It's important to start developing SBOMs early. You don't want to wait until the end and jump off the cliff and try and do it. If you start early and there are issues in creating pieces of the SBOM, you'll know that, you'll resolve those and automate those hopefully, and then when it appears in some other component, you already have your solution in place. So starting early and being able to incrementally improve the process is valuable. And finally, SBOMs in part are there to provide transparency to the device manufacturer's customers. So it's important to include SBOM expectations in the contracting language. So the manufacturer knows what they're supposed to deliver and the HDO knows what they're going to receive. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Matt to talk about threat modeling.
Thank you very much, Penny. So I'm calling to you right now from the MITRE Health Cybersecurity and Resilience Experimentation Lab. So we're located in Bedford, Massachusetts, and we're part of the Massachusetts Digital Health Sandbox. And so what this really allows us to do is partner with other different labs in the state of Massachusetts in order to be able to help out startups and other medical device organizations there and groups in order to really kind of help the healthcare ecosystem here in the state of Massachusetts. So our lab really kind of focuses on what should cybersecurity look like in a clinical setting. Because as healthcare is different from a lot of different other, IoT applications or enterprise applications there. You don't want to go ahead and, have your patient monitor crash because the antivirus, locked up, or your doctor can't get to the ultrasound machine because they forgot their password. So really trying to figure out how cybersecurity works in this type of environment here is really kind of a challenging, application issue that we work on there. So we initially got our start really with a lot of work doing vulnerability impact analysis. And that's really just kind of a fancy way to be able to say that medical devices have cybersecurity vulnerabilities just like every other type of computer that you have out there. And so one of the real challenges though is to try to figure out, is this vulnerability going to have a patient safety impact or not? So one of the things that we do is we work with all the different stakeholders, whether it's the medical device manufacturer, the cybersecurity researcher, or other different organizations there. And we try to figure out what is that actual impact and what can we do about that in order to be able to ensure that, patient safety and continuity of care, continues. So through all the work that we've done with this here, though, not only have we figured out how, or, seen how medical devices break, but we've also kind of seen what makes them strong and resilient. How do they have a vulnerability and what are some of the different architectural design decisions that they made that mitigate that vulnerability and allow, still safe and continued treatment to be able to occur, even when this vulnerability is present in the medical device there. So, based upon kind of the results of this here, how do we go ahead and ensure that medical devices are designed in a secure fashion so that they are resilient to the next cybersecurity vulnerability that comes across us here? So working with the FDA, the answer that we really kind of, all as a community kind of, coalesced around was cybersecurity threat modeling. So the question then is, what does cybersecurity threat modeling look like for medical applications? And so rather than just kind of relying upon our lab, we really trying to turn this into a whole community or, approach to this here. We got together with a lot of different other, experts in this area, medical device manufacturers, cybersecurity researchers, people from regulatory agencies. And we basically started to work together and have a kind of a boot camp in order to be able to try to figure out what should cybersecurity look like for clinical medical applications there. So we started off with a train-the-trainer. So we started off with a core group, and then we expanded this out. And so we actually had 2 different other boot camps that we made even larger to bring more people in there in order to really try to figure out, what should cybersecurity threat modeling look like in this clinical setting, and how can we train people on this here? Now, these boot camps are really effective, but unfortunately, they're challenging. You have to devote like a week in order to be able to attend these boot camps there. They can be expensive. We did make them remote, but still we had to have all the trainers come by and, lead them out as well. And so the question was, how do we go ahead and then further make this more, these lessons that we've learned more accessible to the wider community, especially with the FDA including cybersecurity threat modeling in their pre-market guidance, as Penny mentioned there. So this basically all led to a playbook for threat modeling medical devices that MITRE co-wrote with the MDIC, the medical device, and I always forget their acronym, and I apologize. And so this is basically it's a free document. You can go ahead and online and download it for free. And this provides, basically advice on how do you go ahead and do cybersecurity threat modeling for medical devices there. And the question that we really always get whenever we start talking about this here, though, is, what are the actual threats? Like, are adversaries actually targeting medical devices? And so to answer that, I kind of like to talk about kind of a personal story to me here. So this is a picture that my sister sent me of my niece at the dentist office. My niece was really nervous about getting her braces. And so she was really being adorable. So we were texting back and forth about this here, making jokes. But I'm a nerd. So beyond just kind of focusing on, my cute, nervous niece there, I started to look around at like all the other, different medical devices, connected medical devices that I saw, in the dentist office there. And, I was really interested, what types of systems are they using there? And so, the picture archiving and communication system that they're using was one that I actually hadn't seen before. I looked at the banner, I did some Googling, and I found out that it was a Sodexis 4 Dentsply service, which is just a really lightweight picture archiving and communication system that, smaller dentist offices use in order to be able to kind of store all the patient, imaging information that they're collecting there. So my next question was, I wonder if I could hack this. So I went ahead and I started looking online at the CVEs, which stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. And basically, this is a public repository of different cybersecurity vulnerabilities that pop up in medical devices, or just any devices in general, I should say. And as a system owner or system developer, you really don't want to see your stuff show up here. So that's one of the pluses about trying to do cybersecurity threat modeling, is try to make systems more secure so that doesn't happen. But cybersecurity vulnerabilities do happen. I mean, unfortunately. And for this particular picture archiving communication system, they had a pretty serious one. And so what they did is they basically had a hard-coded default username and password built into the system there that the user could not change. So I'm not the greatest hacker in the world, but if you give me the username and password, I can usually log into a system. So the next question was, are other people in the wild actually trying to exploit this vulnerability here? So the next thing I did was I started looking in honeypot logs. So honeypots are fake systems that researchers put online, and they basically have them open and allow attackers to try to log into them. So that way they can see what attackers are actually doing. And in some of the logs here, we saw that, there was one particular threat actor that was, trying to a whole bunch of different username and passwords to try to log into systems that they found online, just kind of randomly scanning it there. And you can see they're trying to, target smaller, organizations there. So they have different things like admin, user, reception. But they also had misspellings of administrator, which kind of always makes me, laugh a little bit here. But they did have that password for that medical imaging system there as well. So they had, found out about that vulnerability. They had done the research in order to find out what that password and username was. And they were actively trying to scan to be able to see if they could log into systems that were available online. So now we kind of see from the vulnerability to the attackers actually trying to actively exploit this here. And I wish I could say this was only a one-off, that this is the only time that we've seen this happening, but unfortunately this is something that happens quite a lot for a lot of different systems. And this is why it's really important to be able to design secure systems in the first place there. So this gets back to the playbook for threat modeling medical devices here. And so what we did was we tried to create kind of an easy-to-use guide that you can kind of learn from and walk through in order to start to try to develop a threat modeling program inside your organization and start to develop threat models for the medical devices that you're creating here. We structured this guide around 4 main questions. And so these questions kind of really help kind of structure all the different threat modeling activities. And I want to stress that this isn't just like a straightforward process. There is a lot of loops. There's a lot kind of going back as you learn more about your system there. But this is a process, and this is a process that will evolve as your system evolves as well there. So question number one is, what are we working on? And so really it kind of contains a bunch of different techniques for trying to understand the system that you're threat modeling. And that's really kind of a core aspect, because if you don't know your system, it's really hard to understand the threats against it there. Question number two is, what can go wrong? And so this is kind of the threat portion of threat modeling. So this contains a bunch of techniques to basically be able to have structured techniques to be able to think about threats against your system there. Question number three is probably the most important one there, and that's, what are we going to do about that? So really trying to understand, we understand our system, we understand some threats against it here. So how are we going to go ahead and make the system deployable? How are we going to make the system safe and secure in order to really get it out there and actually start providing treatment for patients there? And then question number four is a kind of a meta question. It's kind of a way to look back at your process that you've done there and figure out, did we do a good job? Are there gaps in our threat modeling process there? Is there things that we can do to improve? And how can we improve this going forward as our system evolves there as well? So one of the core things that we found out when we were doing all these boot camps, when we were bringing in a lot of different medical device manufacturers and we were developing this playbook here, was that medical systems are different from other enterprise and IoT systems as well. And so we really needed to be able to have examples that represented some of the specific challenges that medical devices encounter when it comes to cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities. So rather than go ahead and pick a real system, we wanted to make this more generic. So we developed kind of a fictional examples. And the nice thing about creating fictional examples was that we could then create them in ways that highlighted a lot of different areas across different medical devices and different medical device classes that different manufacturers would have to consider for their specific use cases there. So the main medical example that we really kind of use over and over and over again throughout the entire playbook is something called an ankle monitor predictor of stroke. And so this is completely fictional. Don't try to think about how an ankle monitor could actually predict stroke. But even though the sensor itself and the diagnostic portion of it is fictional, we really try to go ahead and base this off of real medical devices that we see over and over again here. For example, if you squint, it kind of looks a little bit like a fingertip pulse oximeter that's connected to a smartphone app. So that way we're able to get the medical sensor that you have to deal with as the patient there. We have a connected application that's connecting to that there. We have a cloud-based system on the back end in order to be able to really make use of that data. Then that has to connect to the hospital systems. It has to connect to the doctor. So there's a lot of really interesting aspects from this here that really make it interesting from a threat modeling perspective. We also really heavily incorporated the NIST NCCOE's Securing Telehealth Remote Patient Monitoring Infrastructure book as well, in order to be able to design this to make this look like other telehealth applications out there. And so, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, this is just kind of a high-level view of the system here. And there's a lot of different, components here. And these components reside all over the place. They can be on the finger, the patient's ankle. They can be in the physician, the nurse's, hand there. They can be in the cloud. They can be in the hospital. And so this exposes a lot of different threats against this application as well that we have to really be able to consider and secure in order to be able to enable this type of an application. Now, we did create other medical devices as well to be able to really kind of highlight the other areas where, medical devices are, have some of their unique challenges. So we also created a stroke nerve effective photography system, SNAP, which is more of a diagnostic device. So this is a big system that you find in the hospital. It has actuators. It has, a ring that goes up and down. It looks a little bit more like a robot there, maybe in some of your use cases there. And this has to connect to all the hospital information systems there. So this connects to your DICOM system, your PAC system, your electronic health record system there. And so really trying to understand, how these all work together here is really kind of a challenging situation that medical device manufacturers have to consider when trying to get their system inside a hospital itself. And our final example that we have in this playbook is a stroke kinematic, I can't even ever say that word there. It's a skate system. But basically, this is a patient treatment option there. So it actually has actuators on the patient's foot there that move the foot around and provide a patient treatment. And so as you can imagine, when you're starting to go ahead and move stuff around the patient there's additional threats that you have to consider from a patient safety aspect there. So one of the challenges we had when creating this playbook was that unfortunately, there's no one-size-fit-all approach to threat modeling that works for all the different organizations there. So you might have a big organization, they have a large threat modeling team, they're able to put a lot of resources into this, and they may have threat model multiple devices across multiple different departments in that organization there. And their approach is going to be different from a small startup company there. So we really want to be able to provide, different techniques that you can kind of tailor to your own use case there. So we talk about different things like data flow diagrams, which provide a very good kind of overall view of your system. And then we talk about other types of diagrams too, because unfortunately, there's not one type of diagram that completely explains your system there. So one thing might talk about, what are different components, but it doesn't talk about how those components actually interact. And so for something like that, you might want to have a swim lane diagram or a state model diagram that really talks about here's how devices authenticate, here's how devices do a software update. And so that way you can have different kind of views of your system depending on what you're trying to really understand about the system and convey that to others as well. The same goes for kind of question number 2 when we start talking about what can go wrong. There's a lot of different ways that you can do threat modeling against a medical system there. So there's very structured techniques like STRIDE, which stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and escalation of privileges. When you start doing STRIDE, it's really helpful. It's really useful for organizations that don't have a lot of experience threat modeling because it really walks you through the threat modeling process. For example, like me personally, one of my challenges is that if I'm not prompted, I very rarely think about repudiation risks, which are really kind of risks where someone says something and someone says something differently there. But that in healthcare really is important. Let's say a medical problem occurs. The nurse may say I did this way here. The doctor may say I did it this way here. The patient may say something different there, and then your logs show something different as well. So really trying to understand where challenges occurred is really important in a healthcare setting, specifically because we want to be able to improve these processes in order to be able to continue to provide safe patient care. So having a structured technique like that really helps to highlight some of these unique challenges that you have. But there are certainly other techniques as well, especially for people to have more experience. So you can start to do things like attack trees and start to try to think like an attacker, try to work through these processes as well there. Question number 3 is really kind of focusing on, what are we going to do about all these threats that we've identified here? And there's certainly a lot of different, techniques that you can do through all this here. One of the big challenges is traceability. So being able to trace, everything from here's a design feature, here's a threat, here's to what we're doing about it. It can be very complicated, especially when you're trying to be able to document that for submission. So we really tried to talk about, different techniques that you can do in order to be able to help with that process. But kind of one of the core things that we really wanted to try to focus on here was really having people be mindful about what is their risk management strategy. And so we try to break this down into kind of 4 different types of approaches that you can take when trying to mitigate risk. So you can eliminate risk, and that sounds like the best option. We're eliminating it, we're safe, we're good. But what people don't really realize is that when you eliminate risk, what you're usually doing is you're eliminating features. So for example, they can't hack us wirelessly if we don't have a wireless connection. So, that can be helpful, but a lot of times you do want to have a wireless connection there. So, you can't eliminate that threat because this is a functionality that you really need to have in order to be able to support, what you're trying to do. So the next approach is to mitigate it. So, okay, we have a wireless connection, so maybe we should add some encryption onto this. Maybe we should add some authentication. Maybe we should talk about, how do we change this key periodically, or when a hospital changes their wireless, connection there, how do we go ahead and update our systems to be able to support that as well there? So, there's still some risk there. There's still some threats, but you're doing something actively in order to be able to try to manage those threats that you're dealing with there. The third option, and this is something that happens all the time too, is just to go ahead and accept that risk. Actually a lot of risks, fall into that category there. Because, there's just things that, you can have other different mitigations in place, or it might just be like, this is not something that we expect to happen. So, this is something that we're going to be mindful about. But, we're going to go ahead and, allow anyway there. And the final option is to be able to transfer risks. So you can go ahead and say, this is not our responsibility. We really expect, for example, the hospital to be able to do these security procedures in order to be able to secure the device. And the one thing that we really wanted to focus on when kind of laying this out here was to prevent the silent transference of risk, because this is something that we see over and over again. And unfortunately, this is a really challenging problem, is that the medical device manufacturer will say, okay, we expect the hospital to put this on a secure network. Well, what does that mean? And so the hospital doesn't really know that either. And so you have this kind of silent transference of all this risk here, and the hospital doesn't know what they're expected to do in order to be able to mitigate that there. So trying to make that a little bit more explicit is something that's really helpful in order to make sure that these systems are more secure. And finally, question number 4 is like, did we do a good job? This is basically kind of different feedback mechanisms that you can use in order to really try to understand, where, how your process is doing. So for example, you can kind of monitor other vulnerabilities as they come out, and you can try to map them and say, okay, did we predict this vulnerability from during our threat modeling process here? But once again, this is kind of an iterative process that you can use in order to improve your threat modeling process. The other thing is to be able to see like whether your developers actually appreciate this as well. So one of the things that we find out a lot is when we start to model a system, when we start to develop all these diagrams, like the manufacturer's like, oh wait, we always wanted these diagrams. Like we never understood how it all is connected, or it was one person over there and they never told anyone. So, being able to see these positive benefits of the threat modeling process is another way to be able, as a feedback mechanism, to show how useful it can be for all kind of aspects of the system there. So, just as a real quick kind of case study of this here, one of the common devices that we see in hospitals all the time is controlled substance infusion pumps. I mean, we have one back here for our patient as well. And the key thing about controlled substance infusion pumps is that they dispense controlled substances, so like pain medication. So you don't want to have your patient kind of reaching in there and squeezing that bag of morphine really wicked hard. So all these controlled substance infusion pumps will generally have some sort of plastic case for the medication there, and they'll have a key to lock that medication inside a controlled substance infusion pump. So this is a pretty, I would say standard, security technique. You have something that's, really valuable. You don't want people accessing it. So you put a door on it, you put a lock on that, and you secure that key there. So one of the challenges, and this is one surprise to me when I first got into the medical device field, was that, for these controlled substance infusion pumps, they tend to go ahead and use the exact same key for every single one of their devices. So I can go into a hospital here in Massachusetts. I can, take that key and I can unlock an infusion pump. I can go to California. I can unlock an infusion pump there. I can go to Japan or Australia or China, and I can unlock infusion pumps there as well. And these keys are really easy to get. So you just go online, you pay 20 bucks or something like that there, and they'll ship you these keys. And this is across the industry. So it's not just really one medical device manufacturer that does this here. Pretty much every single medical device manufacturer kind of does this, approach here. So one of the questions that, I initially had was like, is this a problem? This is across the industry here. And when I started kind of digging into it, initially my gut feeling was that this is like the most basic cybersecurity problem. You have a secure key, you give that key out to everyone. How secure is it? But when we started working with actual healthcare providers, we started talking to nurses, it really became apparent that this was not an issue because there's other security controls in place. So if I go into Mass Brigham's, one of their hospitals there, and I start trying to unlock their infusion pumps, they'll have nurses will yell at me, doctors will yell at me, the security guard might give me a problem there. So there's like physical controls in place in order to stop just random people from walking in there and unlocking infusion pumps. At the same time, as a patient, I'm not going to have that, forethought in order to be like, okay, I'm going to go bungee jumping later today. I better go online and get one of these keys in case I end up in the ICU. So, and this key here is really to protect the patient from themselves. So that patient's not going to have that key. And then from a safety standpoint, it's really important for that key to be universal there, because you want all the doctors and our nurses to be able to access these devices if something goes wrong. You also need that locking mechanism to be very reliable. You don't want to have, the pin to be a little bit off or something like that there when they're trying to access it and not be able to really be able to change that medication quickly for that patient there. So, even though this sounds like a really big cybersecurity problem there, it really is mitigated by other different types of ways. And so when we talk about threat modeling, this is really what we're talking about, is this process to be able to really try to understand what the threats are and then document those mitigations in place there. So another thing, on a related note, going back to kind of those CVEs or those vulnerabilities there, one thing that we see over and over and over again for medical devices, just like I showed in kind of that previous example there, is stored credentials. So these are, credentials that are stored inside that device there. So this was for a kind of a vulnerability that basically said that, a researcher was able to open up a infusion pump there. They were able to extract the flash chip from that infusion pump, and they were able to access that memory of that flash chip there. And so they were able to get things like the hospital Wi-Fi credentials off this flash chip. So the question is, is this a problem here too? This sounds very similar to kind of the previous example there. Because if I start to go into a hospital and I take like a screwdriver and pliers and stuff like that there, and I start disassembling their infusion pumps, I'm probably gonna get yelled at a bit there. But where this is a little bit different, unfortunately, is that these infusion pumps don't always stay in the hospital. So a lot of devices that we have here in our lab, we actually buy off of eBay. I have a really interesting seller history actually, or buyer history. So, they're pretty cheap. So we definitely go ahead and we buy these devices off of eBay here. And so we have them in our lab now. So we can go ahead, we can, open them up. This one here had a tamper evidence seal that was pretty easy to bypass. But actually, that was actually a really kind of good thing because, it's not to really stop someone in the lab, from being able to access it. It's really to kind of stop, bored, biomed technicians from just opening up the device there. So yeah, here's the memory flash chip there, and so I was able to go ahead and extract that no problem. Now, as a disclaimer, I didn't actually find any credentials on this particular device that we have here. I have to add this in because lawyers. But I will say, in a lot of other devices, we have found Wi-Fi credentials off those. We found patient records off those. We do have a number of conversations with lawyers about what to do about this here. And this is not just us that we do this here too. So for example, other researchers have had similar experiences. Rapid7 did a study. They bought 13 infusion pumps off of eBay. 8 of them had hospital Wi-Fi credentials still on them. Some of them actually had Active Directory credentials as well on them as well. And I would say this kind of matches kind of our success ratio too, as far as finding medical records on these devices when we purchase them off of third-party sellers. So what I was just talking about there is an example of a high-value data flow, because what we're really talking about in that case is, one of the things you have to do when threat modeling is consider how do you retire these devices even? How do you go ahead and, have that hospital dispose of these devices? What is the hospital supposed to do about that there? And so there's a lot of different other high-value data flows too that can tend to pop up in healthcare settings there about areas where these are things that a lot of different manufacturers have to do this, and these are areas where they tend to have problems when trying to do this as well. So for example, you have to authenticate with external servers. You have to obtain software updates. You have to restore from backup. How do you go ahead and do all these types of things here, and how do you do them securely? So that's another thing that the threat modeling kind of process kind of goes through is like, how do you consider kind of these data flows, and how do you do these securely, and are you doing these securely there? So for example, in the playbook, we do have some examples. So we start to go through some of these high-value data flows, like a software update, and we start to highlight different challenges that we've seen with other medical device manufacturers as well. For what did they do wrong with doing this here? So that way you can kind of learn on how to better be able to structure your processes as well. So now I kind of want to open this up to Q&A, but thank you very much. But you can go ahead and scan that QR code there if you want to be able to download that playbook. Don't worry, you can trust us. We also have the URL if you want to type it in yourself as well. And we do have contact information if you want to continue to ask us questions afterwards as well.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much, Penny. That was super insightful in presentation. And as you say, Now we're going to open up for questions from the audience. What are the most common cybersecurity oversights startups make when designing robotics medical devices, and how can threat modeling help avoid them?
So I'll start this off by just saying probably the biggest mistake is not doing threat modeling until the very end of the process. Because it's really hard to bolt on security afterwards. And thinking about how security is going to interface with your design of your product is much easier to do as you do it earlier on in the process. A good example of this is software update. Really trying to understand how you're going to update the software is really kind of key. And so making that early on is really helpful, especially since you're going to be iterating upon your product. You're going to be changing around. You're going to have a chance to really use that quite a bit as well there. But other things like even how you connect to the hospital Wi-Fi system is really kind of a challenge, and that has a lot of cybersecurity issues into it. So thinking about that early on is really helpful as well.
All right, so we have one from Russell here. How do you balance ease of use versus security? For example, BitLock PCs being bricked because the code was lost.
It's a real challenge, I think one of the things from a cybersecurity standpoint is we have to get kind of into the use case of saying yes, because it's really tempting a lot of times from like an RMF standpoint or a compliance standpoint to say no, you can't do this. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to enable these types of security processes in place. So it does need to be a conversation between your security staff and your clinical staff, your development staff, in order to really be able to figure out how do you enable these usable features there. So like with a BitLocker, that's always a challenge there, especially when you start talking about like rebooting the system, which I have to happen a lot there, and you don't want to have to call in a biomed technician to run over there and try to unlock the system after it's rebooted. So really trying to be able to understand what are the risks for attackers gain physical access to that hard drive versus the usability risk is the conversation that you want to have from the threat modeling process. So it's a balancing act versus a really, you have to do it this way or this way here.
Right. And just to build on that, I mean, it all is a matter of risk, and the hospitals ultimately are the ones who are responsible because they're the ones who care for the patients, and they have to determine what risk is acceptable to them. So for example, in lots of large hospitals, every infusion pump will have the same pin. Why? Because when a patient is moved from one unit to another, they take their infusion pump with them. And you can't expect the nurses and clinical staff to know the pins for thousands of infusion pumps. So they all have the same pin, but hospitals will then, like every 6 months or so, change the pin. So, they're trying to figure out what is an acceptable level of security control that I can put in place while ensuring patient safety. Fundamentally, patient safety is going to trump anything. And but hospital, another issue is you have to consider the environment that a device is in. If it's in a room with a cyber lock and there are going to be, clinicians around all the time, maybe you don't have to worry about certain kinds of security controls because you're going to let environmental controls help protect the device. So
the FDA has increased its emphasis on SBOMs and pre-market submissions. So for startups with limited resources, what should be prioritized when building and maintaining an SBOM?
So first of all, go and do it. Avail yourselves of tools. Startups actually often are in a better place than larger manufacturers with all these legacy code bases because you're building from scratch. You're probably using modern build technologies, and they can generate your SBOMs for you automatically in your CI/CD processing. So you need to look at those and apply those.
As a follow-up here, for early stage startups, SBOMs can feel a little bit abstract. So could you explain what an SBOM actually is in the context of a medical device cybersecurity? What format is it typically takes, and how teams usually generate one? As Penny, as
Okay.
you were describing it, I realized my mental image was a PDF report or a static log,
So
which
it
I'm
can
guessing is
be.
not quite accurate.
So it can be a PDF report, and quite frankly, sometimes FDA will ask the manufacturer to give them the SBOM as a PDF because they can't make any sense out of the machine-readable form. So basically, FDA asks for a machine-readable SBOM, and that can be a PDF file. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. You know, lots of people for the embedded systems developed in C, C++, they just go and create a spreadsheet with the SBOM information. But typically, it's the machine-readable versions are in one of two forms called Cyclone DX and SPDX. SPDX is more commonly used in proprietary code, and Cyclone DX in open source software. And these are typically either in JSON or XML. And so it's a bunch of attributes and values. And, you know, we described what the minimum elements are. So, you know, it would be, you know, a component name, and there would be a string like log4j. There would be a version, that would be, you know, version number 1.2.3. And so on. So it's really just usually a JSON or XML file, but it could also be a PDF to be more human readable.
So I see a question online here asking about challenges with a vulnerability that was identified during a penetration test of a medical device, where basically it sounds like it's vulnerable to TCP flooding, so a lot of traffic coming across it. And so the challenge is, you know, is that a vulnerability that needs to be mitigated, or is it something that the hospital can actually handle from protecting it on their network there? And I think this is a good example of, you know, talking about the transference of risk there. You know, is a hospital, you know, understanding that that's actually, you know, something that they're responsible for being able to protect against it. And as a kind of a quick war story, you know, early on in my career, I was working in, I would say, other fields, and I was doing a penetration test myself on a wireless network that's supporting first responders, so like firefighters and stuff like that there. And I ran my security tools against it. I sent a lot of traffic, and I crashed their communication system, which was really stressful. But I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do that. You know, the lab didn't know they were supposed to do that there, and it had a real world impact that we had to, you know, basically send people on top of buildings and, you know, physically reset some systems there, or you know, and change that around. You know, it's a conversation, and so it's really trying to be able to ensure that, you know, this vulnerability, you know, the mitigations for that there, everyone's aware of what their role is and what their responsibility is in order to mitigate it, versus just going ahead and just allowing it and saying someone else is going to deal with it there.
I think we have to wrap it up for today, but thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of Mass Robotics and our Healthcare Robotics Working Group, I want to extend a big thank you to our speakers, Penny Chase and Matt Weir, for such an insightful and practical session. Your work is helping shape how robotics and medical device innovators think about cybersecurity from day one, and we're grateful for your continued effort in this space. To everyone here who joined us today, we hope today's webinar gave you a clear understanding of what it takes to design secure, FDA-ready healthcare robotic systems. The landscape is evolving quickly, and conversations like this one are critical to ensuring both innovation and safety move forward together. This session was part of our Healthcare Robotics Startup Catalyst program, which supports early-stage robotics companies building the future of care. So thanks again, and we hope to see you soon at a future Mass Robotics event. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all, and thanks everyone for attending.